The undefeated streak is no more. The Louisville Cardinals lost to the Pittsburgh Panthers 38-21 on the road on Saturday for the first loss of the season. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to talk about how the Cardinals just couldn't get out of their own way, getting shut out in the second half, and the offense being one-dimensional on Saturday. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Unfortunately, the Louisville Cardinals lost their first game of the season on Saturday on the road at Pittsburgh, 38-21 defeat to the hands of the Panthers. It was a very, very tough performance. A performance where Louisville just seemingly couldn't get out of their own way. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the offense not scoring a single point in the second half, and also the offense being pretty much one-dimensional through the entirety of the contest. So, it's one of those performances where it was the main trap game of the season. It felt like, coming off of the huge win against Notre Dame. You now play a Pittsburgh team that had lost 4 in a row. They'd only won one game throughout the year. All signs pointed to Louisville being able to win that game. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We talked about on the preview episode of the show how the cards were being aligned, or the stars were being aligned for a very opportunistic trap game for Pittsburgh. There was the weather to focus on, which made things pretty interesting. And then you had a change at quarterback, which could spark a team as well. But it seemed like nothing could truly go right for the Cardinals. Now, granted, they went into halftime with the 21-14 lead and got the ball after the half to start the third quarter, but seemingly the team was not able to get out of its own way. This was a pretty frustrating loss. And this is no disrespect meant to Pittsburgh, but I truly felt watching that game that Louisville was hands down the better team. I mean, you look at the statistical numbers. Louisville had 430 total yards of offense to Pittsburgh's 288. They had 350 in the air. They almost had more rushing yards than Pittsburgh, and this was a Louisville team that usually rushes for a lot more than 80 yards a game. So it was in the matter of turnovers. Louisville turned the ball over 3 times in this game, and all 3 turnovers were deep into Pittsburgh territory. But like I said, I thought that Louisville was the better team in this contest. That's what makes this loss pretty tough to swallow, because it wasn't a matter of Pittsburgh just playing out of their minds. I honestly felt like Pittsburgh, despite scoring 38 points, didn't have the greatest game. Christian Veilleux, in his first start for the Panthers, completed 12 of 26 passes for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. They ran the ball 33 times for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's also not necessarily great numbers on the ground. And their defense gave up almost 450 yards. So it feels like the performance at the beginning of the season, the Clemson-Duke game, to where Duke won the game pretty convincingly. But when you go back and you look at the numbers, you realize that Clemson was the better team statistically. They moved the ball down the field. It's just that they could not get in the end zone. They could not get out of their own way, and costly turnovers derailed drives, so on and so forth. And you look at those 3 turnovers, and that's pretty much the name of the game here, because early on in the first half, you get the 14-7 lead, right? Pittsburgh then has to go ahead and punt, and then you have 2nd and 10 at the Pittsburgh 15. You look like you're going to score again, at least a field goal, and then Jack Plummer gets sacked, fumbles the football, and ultimately Pittsburgh retains possession. They score a touchdown on a 10-play drive. The very next drive to tie the game, Louisville did then score a touchdown to end the first half, but second half, you had the 3 and out at the Louisville 34-yard line to where it was 4th and 1, and Maurice Turner ran for no gain. Gave Pittsburgh the ball with very, very good field position. They ended up going down and hitting a field goal. Louisville's defense did what they needed to do. They pretty much held them to a field goal, and then right after that, a Louisville punt followed up by a Pittsburgh touchdown. Louisville drove the ball down the field after that. It was then followed up by a pick six, which felt like a back-breaking play at the time, but the Cardinals went down the field and started marching again at the Pittsburgh 24. Jack Plummer's pass was intercepted. And it was just a situation to where, nothing felt like it could go right in the second half. The Cardinals couldn't get out of their own way. There was a play in the second half when Louisville went down for the first time. Pittsburgh took the lead for the first time in the game. On a third down play, Jack Plummer threw a pass over the top to Jamari Thrash, and if Thrash doesn't slip, then it's a touchdown. And it just seemed like that was sort of the epitome of the game, to where Louisville had the opportunities to really put this game out of reach, and they let Pittsburgh get back into the game. Now, Pittsburgh is seemingly tried their best to allow Louisville to then come back into the game in the fourth quarter, but Louisville really wasn't able to do so. I think it was a perfect storm of a couple things. Number one, Jawar Jordan got hurt. It was a pretty interesting situation. He only had a couple of carries on the evening. I think it was 2 carries for 8 yards. When you lose one of the most dynamic running backs in college football in a game to where you're expected to run the ball a good amount because of the weather conditions. I'm not sure if you all watched it. Granted, it was on the CW app. If you all were able to watch it, you realize that it was pouring for the majority of the night. Coming into the weekend, it was supposed to rain, and then the day of, it's like, it seems like it's going to hold off. Spotty showers here and there. No. It poured for, I would say, 95% of the game on Saturday. Now, granted, both teams had to play in that pouring rain, so you can't really use that as an excuse. But I do think that the weather benefited Pittsburgh's offense more than it did Louisville's offense, because it essentially created a situation to where Louisville had to then go with a totally different playing style. Granted, I say that, but the Cardinals still had 350 passing yards. Jack Plummer threw the ball 52 times when it was raining. So you can say that it benefited Pittsburgh's offense more, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a huge advantage at all. I feel like there was a slight advantage, but it wasn't a huge advantage. Here's the thing. You can't make excuses for this game. There's always the shoulda, coulda, woulda. I mean, it is what it is. Credit to Pittsburgh for creating the turnovers, for handling business, doing what needed to be done, coming out of this game with a victory. Hats off to them. You give them credit, but it just doesn't feel like they were the better team in this game. Now, that doesn't matter. In the win-loss column, it doesn't say WL and then in parentheses who was the better team. That's not how sports works, right? You still have to execute and do the small things to win football games. And unfortunately, adversity struck in this matchup against Pittsburgh. A couple of injuries for the Cardinals, some very tough turnovers, and the Cardinals lose their first game of the season. They're 6-1 heading into the bye week, trying to regroup, trying to get healthy. It'll be interesting to hear about the status of Jawar Jordan moving forward. It seems like it was a hamstring issue, if I'm not mistaken. Jamari Thrash had a hand issue. We'll see how that is able to heal moving into that matchup against Duke here in a little over or a little under 2 weeks. But yeah, it is what it is. Felt like Louisville just couldn't get out of their own way on Saturday evening. Credit to Pittsburgh for getting it done, but at the end of the day, that's a performance that, Louisville definitely wishes they had back. So I want to break down the performance a little bit more. That second half shutout is what I want to focus on the most. Louisville led 21-14 going into the halftime intermission, and Pittsburgh won the second half 24-0. We're going to talk about that here momentarily after we talk about a couple of our sponsors, beginning with the title sponsor of the show, Gametime. I'll be honest with you, getting tickets to sporting events has become a real pain in the side. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. It takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They have the lowest price guarantee. So essentially what that means is that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Also want to take this time to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. For me, it's the most fun that I've had, winning up to, I think it's 25 times my money this football season. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. It's really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. For me, it's something that I started here just a couple weeks ago, and it has been fantastic. I'm a big Chargers fan, so I love to see the projections on Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, and company. So be sure to check out the projections for your favorite players. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use the code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege with the promo code lockedoncollege. It's something that you definitely need to take a look at because it's daily fantasy sports made easy. So be sure to take a look. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. The college football season over halfway through already. Wow, that's really, really sad to say. But Locked On is continuing to kick up our coverage with the Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, while going in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to stay tuned. Okay, moving on into the second segment of this reaction podcast of the Locked On Louisville podcast, focusing on the 38-21 loss for the Louisville Cardinals against the Pittsburgh Panthers. The main thing here was the second half for me. Louisville was, I'm not going to say atrocious in the first half because they put up 21 points, against the weather. Jawar Jordan is out. You look at one of the drives being a turnover as well. So putting up 21 points, having a lead going into the second half with the ball coming out of the intermission, you felt pretty decent about where you were. So I thought it was a pretty decent effort in the first half. Second half, it was rough. Granted, Louisville was able to move the ball down the field early on in the second half. outside of the very first 2 drives, it was very rough to watch the turnovers unfold. First 2 drives, the first drive was a 3 and out. Louisville looked to try to capitalize on a short yardage 4th and 1 to go at their own 35-yard line. They got into the shotgun and gave it to Maurice Turner, who was unable to get that yard. I do wonder, this isn't just Louisville, but this is sports in general. When you have less than 4th and 1 or 4th and 2, why you don't operate under center rather than in the shotgun. Sometimes maybe that's a scheme issue. Sometimes maybe it's, the ball is extremely wet. I'm not necessarily sure. I thought that was very interesting. For me, I'm not sure what went into that play call there, but I was wondering why Brohm elected for Plummer to go in the shotgun rather than up under center. But regardless, Louisville wasn't able to convert the 4th down. They gave the ball back to Pittsburgh. The defense did what they needed to do to force a field goal. Pittsburgh hit a field goal, went down by 4. The Cardinals then weren't able to do anything on the next drive and gave the ball back to Pittsburgh. And, well, guess what? The Panthers then went down and scored 13 plays, 61-yard drive. Louisville then found their momentum in the second half. They were able to move the ball down the field. Jamari Thrash, if he didn't slip, it was a touchdown on a 3rd and 1 from the Louisville 34. It ended up being a 31-yard catch and run, and the Cardinals ended up getting down to the Pittsburgh 20-yard line. And for whatever reason, Plummer's pass, it felt like Jamari Thrash was pushed a little bit before the pass was thrown, but regardless, MJ Devonshire took a pass, read a route and took it to the house. Pittsburgh went up by 10. Louisville then went right back down trying to cut the deficit. And, it was not pretty that way either. A ball that was thrown to Jimmy Callaway was looked like it was right in Callaway's hands, and the ball popped up, and just so happened that the Pittsburgh defensive back was right there. It is what it is. Pittsburgh then punted the ball away again. Look, after Pittsburgh had that pick 6, look at their drives. 3 plays, 8 yards, 3 plays, -1 yards, 3 plays, 3 yards. So the Cardinals had their opportunities. The issue was that they had 2 interceptions and a missed field goal. And then there was an opportunity to where Pittsburgh had a horrible punt. Louisville got the ball at the 50-yard line and seemingly had a turnover on downs. Pittsburgh would then score on a 4th and 5 pass from Bayer to Louisville was just never able to get anything going. So second half was the thing to focus on here, is that it wasn't, it looks bad because you didn't score, but Louisville moved the ball down the field for a good portion of that second half. It felt like in the 4th quarter, when the Cardinals were still down 10, trying to make things happen, it felt like Louisville was just trying to hit a home run, throw a Hail Mary to someone down the field, and trying to get those big yardage plays back right there, instead of maybe trying to go down the field, dink and dunk until you were able to get close to the end zone. But like I said, you can criticize this all you want, but it is what it is. Very rough second half. One that, Brohm and them are going to look at, heading into the bye week, hoping that the Cardinals are able to adjust and just be able to reset. It's not ideal. We're going to talk on the next episode of the show about, despite the loss being really tough to swallow, the season's not over. And I mentioned it in the preview episode. This doesn't derail the season. One loss does not derail the season. If you suggest that it does, man, I wish I could be that optimistic. Granted, I'm not saying that it's acceptable to lose to Pittsburgh, but looking forward, the silver lining is that we still have 5 games to go. So, the second half was not ideal. Obviously, you have a couple different factors that are being played into here. Weather, very unfortunate turnovers at unfortunate spots on the field. I really felt like that pick 6 was the game changer here. If Louisville was able to at least get a field goal and tie that game up, which, you're at the 20-yard line there. So if that's an incomplete pass and Louisville then throws another incomplete pass, and it's 4th and 10 from the 20. I think that Travelstead hits a 37-yard field goal that would at least tie the game, and then Pittsburgh would then have to go down and win the game with their offense, which they, in the second half, they had 2 touchdown drives, but both one of the drives was a drive over 60 yards. Outside of that, it was short yardage opportunities, so you didn't really put a lot of pressure on Christian Veilleux and that Louisville, and that Pittsburgh offense. So mainly, it's just really, really tough to swallow here. I do now want to focus on. We're going to talk about the defense on the next episode of the show, but I want to talk about the offense being one-dimensional, sort of like in that game against NC State. The Cardinals really weren't able to do much on the ground. We will discuss that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at Athletic Brewing. So this past weekend on Friday, the Louisville volleyball team went out and swept a top 10 opponent in Pittsburgh. The game changer there was the crowd at the KFC Yum Center. Absolutely electric atmosphere. But Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, golden, sours, and more. My favorite is the Oktoberfest. It's especially appropriate for this time of the year. Their brews are great tasting and award-winning. You don't get any hangovers ever. They're fit for all times. Watching a big game, tackling work, working out, whatever activity that you are partaking in. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use the code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Okay. Final segment of this reaction episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. The Louisville offense, like I said, statistically speaking, they had a good day statistically. Now, granted, you turn the ball over 3 times, it's tough. It's tough to win a game when you turn it over 3 times and you don't force 1 turnover. And that is very evident by the statistical advantage that Louisville had, but still lost by 17 points. I think that one reason why the Louisville offense was unable to get into a rhythm is because we saw, now granted, every game's not going to be the same scheme, the same game plan, but Jack Plummer threw the ball 52 times in the game against Pittsburgh. Now, I would venture into saying that a good amount of those were at the end of the game when the Cardinals were doing their best to make a very valiant comeback, but 52 times the ball was thrown. He completed 29 of those passes for 350 yards and a touchdown. Jawar Jordan going out hurt the Cardinals a lot. And that's where it really comes into play here. But you look at this, and I think that they still had some pretty solid rushing numbers outside of that for the most part, but I felt like Louisville wasn't really able to get anything going on the ground. Maurice Turner had 12 carries for 81 yards. Isaac Grindo, 13 for 38 and 2 touchdowns. Jordan had 2 for 8. This is where you kind of look at things and it's like, it's a little rough. But at the end of the day, I felt like the Louisville offense was pretty decently one-dimensional. They ran the ball 33 times for 80 yards. That's about 2.4 yards per carry. Granted, some of that is going to be looked at as sack yardage, considering that Jack Plummer had minus 47 rushing yards. So if you essentially go back and take out some of those numbers, if you take out the sack yardage numbers, you're still sitting at about 3.8 yards per carry. So it's not necessarily a performance that we're used to seeing from this Louisville team. I will say this. I'm not necessarily worried about the rushing attack moving forward. Like I said, I think that the weather plays more of an impact than you will have seen because look, the Pittsburgh offense wasn't great either. That's the thing about it. Like this Pittsburgh offense did what they needed to do to move the ball down the field at times and to win games, but it wasn't like the Panthers put on this extremely solid offensive performance and Louisville was just not able to get anything going. The weather affected both teams. So at the end of the day, I don't necessarily have a ton of concern moving forward for this rushing attack, especially you hope to get Jawar Jordan back pretty soon. Hopefully it's not necessarily a lingering issue to where, he's missing an extended amount of time, although I do think that Maurice Turner and Isaac Garendo can fill the needs. It's hard to replace a guy like Jawar Jordan. So I think that the one-dimensional performance from Louisville, allowed Pittsburgh to then do what NC State did. That is get after the quarterback. And with, receivers having trouble holding on to passes, with the overall offense not being able to stop the Pittsburgh defense. Look, I think the Pittsburgh defense was pretty solid coming into this game. Now, granted, the turnover numbers weren't there for them. They had only forced a handful of turnovers, but they had 3 turnovers in this game against Louisville. So it's one of those performances to where you just kind of take it on the chin and move on, unfortunately. We'll talk about it on the next episode of the show, more so the defensive performance. But it's really hard to bring a ton of takeaways from this because of the weather, because of some of the injuries the offense faced. But regardless, a loss is a loss. Felt like the Cardinals couldn't get out of their own way. So that's going to wrap up this reaction episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. To find the show on all streaming services, be sure to stay tuned to this graphic. The Locked On Louisville podcast continues to be free and available wherever you get your podcasts.